law of qisas, or retribution, which in one school of jurisprudence allows the heirs to pardon the murder. So, for example, if the father can pardon a son who kills his sister, then he will get away with it, and in those countries where this law exists. What do modern men think about honor killings? Bassam al-Hadi, the Jordanian with an American doctorate who spent 12 years as a hospital administrator in the United States, when asked whether he would kill a daughter who had sex outside of marriage, said, "I would do what I have to do." Let me speak about something very sad. UNIFEM estimates that more than 130 million girls and women alive today have undergone female genital mutilation, FGM, mainly in Africa and some in Middle Eastern countries, and 2 million girls a year are at the risk of mutilation. If we think that FGM is happening somewhere far away and it's someone else's problem, let's think again. FGM is being practiced among immigrant communities in Europe, North America, and Australia as we speak. And many governments are turning a blind eye to this epidemic because they believe it's based in faith. So let me clarify that it's justified through a very patriarchal, twisted understanding of Hadith literature, but does not exist in the Quran. For your information, Hadith consists of prophetic statements compiled about 200 years after the Prophet's death. A very difficult task when I can't even remember what my husband said last night. Here is how Sheikh Muhammad al-Musair from Al-Azhar University put it. He said, I quote, "Female circumcision is no less valid just because it was practiced in pharaonic times and in the Jahiliyyah." The references used for these notions of law come from many sources, and a popular one today is Umdatus Salik, which is the reliance of the traveler, a classical manual of Islamic law endorsed by Al-Azhar in 1991, conforming to the practices and faith of the Orthodox Sunni community. And it has these few notes. There's many which are mind-boggling, but here is a note which translated. It says, circumcision is obligatory for both men and women, and this has been commented by a sheikh. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qadawi, a name that many of us are familiar with, one of the Sunni Islam's most influential clerics and the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, favors partial circumcision for women because he is a moderate, just, and reasonable leader. And he thinks that this is a solution that is very important for reality. In a fatwa in this issue he wrote, and I quote, "Anyone who thinks that circumcision is the best way to protect his daughters should do it. I support this particularly in the period in which we live." And what do other educated intellectual men say about stoning, which is also not sanctioned or mentioned in the Quran? The Saudi ambassador to London, Ghazi al-Qusaybi, said that stoning may seem irrational to the Western mind, but it is, and I quote, "at the core of the Islamic faith," he says. He's an intellectual, and he asserted that stoning adulterers to death is a legitimate punishment for society. He also says that Westerners should respect Muslim culture on this matter. Well, let me share with you that per capita, Saudi men are known to be the most adulterous that I have ever known. So let's see where this is going to start with the stoning for adultery. Take a look at rape, which has become a weapon of war in many parts of the world. And while most of the civilized world condemns rape and works to eradicate this trauma, there are those who make sentencing of the perpetrator impossible, very hard. The Quran does not mention rape, but it severely prohibits sexual relationships between men and women who are not married to each other. Rape, therefore, is considered as zina, adultery in Sharia law, because even though forced on the victim, sexual relations between men and women should not take place. And who gets blamed for it? According to the annual report of the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, the National Commission on the Status of Women in Pakistan reported that Sharia courts in Pakistan have punished thousands of raped women by long-term imprisonment. It's become so chronic that raped women stopped reporting to the police, and it's no surprise that the majority of people in Pakistani jails are women. In Pakistan, rape is included in what is known as the hudud, the religious ordinance, and there is no change allowed in this ordinance. This was implemented by one of our presidents called Ziaul Haq. Another key element in the hudud laws is that only eyewitnesses are acceptable. So according to the law, they have to provide 4 live witnesses. Now in Bangladesh, they have little Sharia courts set up all over the villages, and they punish and rape minor girls who have been raped. A 14-year-old rape victim, Hina, is flogged to death by an informal Sharia court. This was reported this year in February 2011. In Nigeria, a 13-year-old rape victim, Baria, was given 100 lashes for illicit sex and 100 lashes for accusing 3 rapists without proof. And what is this shameful proof that this woman has to provide? Well, either the accused has to make a confession, there have to be 4 adult male witnesses to the rape, and punishment will take place only for the perpetrator when the rape has been proven by these witnesses. And by the way, women are not allowed to be witnesses on account of what it says in the law, their weakness of understanding, want of memory, and incapacity of governing. I even beg you to think who has created these laws. So these proofs are almost impossible to find. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just want to very quickly tell you that Dr. Amina Wadood is an excellent scholar, and she went to an AIDS conference, but she was actually criticized and asked to leave when she spoke about the rise of AIDS in countries against Muslim women because of the context of Islam, where a Muslim wife is not only expected to be, but defined in terms of being unconditionally sexually available to her husband. So I'm going to leave this here and hope that at some point you will ask us about solutions, and we should be able to offer you some solutions as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rahil. That was great. Our next speaker is Marina Nemat. Marina was 16 years old when she was captured, imprisoned, tortured, and forced to marry during the Iranian Revolution. Her remarkable story of survival and escape to Canada is her best-selling memoir, Prisoner of Tehran. Marina's recent book, After Tehran, A Life Remembered, was published last year while she was on a fellowship at the University of Toronto. Marina is a tireless educator, tells her moving story to audiences all over the world, and speaks out about her painful experiences to help others. Marina Nemat was awarded the first Human Dignity Prize in December 2007. This prize is to be given annually by the European Parliament and the Cultural Association Europa 2004. The Human Dignity Prize, quote, celebrates organizations and individuals working for a world free from intolerance and social justice, a world where fundamental human rights are respected. The prize committee said that Nemat was chosen, quote, because of her strength of character despite her life experiences. Marina.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on such a rainy night. You know, I know that we Canadians are tough, but usually the sight of rain, you know, scares a lot of people. So thank you so much for being here. I really, and I'm sure all of our panel members here really appreciate your presence. Thank you. Well, I guess my approach to this whole situation of Sharia law and how it feels to actually live under it comes from very personal experience. I don't even write notes because I believe that if what I say, if it comes from my heart, it works much better. And what I have been through is not something that one can simply forget. I was born in Iran in 1965. I grew up there. Back then, Iran was not an Islamic republic, and we had a king. We called him the Shah. And I grew up in a Christian family in Iran. Iran at the time was more than 98% Muslim, and the remainder, less than 2%, were Christian, Zoroastrian, Baha'i, and Jewish. And we all lived next to each other, side by side. We were neighbors. I never, ever felt discriminated in any way when I was growing up in Iran. I went to a Zoroastrian high school for girls. We had girls of every faith in our school, and again, I never felt discriminated. And we had maybe 2 Christians in my school. There were about 1,200 students, and maybe 10 Baha'i, and maybe 2 Jewish girls, and then the majority were Muslim, and then we had quite a few Zoroastrians as well. And I spent my summers at the cottage by the Caspian Sea, and I used to dance to the tunes of the Bee Gees. I read Jane Austen and Ernest Hemingway and a lot of Persian poetry. And we watched The Little House on the Prairie, dubbed into Farsi, and we watched the Donny and Marie Osmond show, and I was madly in love with Donny Osmond, and I was very offended when he got married. So this was my life. I had dreams of becoming a medical doctor. Women could become judges in Iran. They could become the prime minister if they wanted to. So the road was clear. We had a very secular, the laws of the country were very secular and very tolerant of every religion and every ethnicity and every background. And you know what? It was, to me, growing up, it was a good life. Of course, I didn't know that the Shah didn't tolerate at all any kind of political criticism. But that was none of my business. I could dance and sing and wear little bikinis on the beach, and the miniskirt was in, and I was allowed to look pretty and flirt with boys and read whatever, the kind of literature that I was interested in. I was not interested in Marx and Lenin. I didn't even know who Marx and Lenin were. And that was life. And then one summer, we came back from the cottage, and there was a tank parked at my door, and yes, the revolution had taken place. Khomeini, who had become the leader of the revolution, and had promised the people of Iran freedom and democracy. He returned from exile. The Shah had left the country, and an Islamic Republic was announced. At the beginning, it looked fine. There were a lot of ideas out there. I had no idea who Marx and Lenin were, but now suddenly their books were everywhere, and some people were religious fanatics, some people were Marxists, and you know what? Everything went just fine. But then things began to change, and as I usually try to explain to Western audiences, it is very important, it is essential to understand that revolutions, especially now that we are facing many of them in the Middle East, revolutions always promise freedom and democracy. There's no revolution that they got out there and they say, we want a horrible dictatorship. It doesn't go that way. But then, in a lot of cases, and it doesn't even need to be a religious revolution. Look at the Chinese Revolution, look at the Russian Revolution, and then the Iranian Revolution was a religious one. But many of these revolutions, when you look at them, they do not give the people what they have promised. And the same thing happened with Iran. Now, it is important to understand that horror in history doesn't happen overnight. It's not that you go to bed tonight and tomorrow you have Hitler on your hands. It doesn't go that way. Hitler was cute when he was 2 years old. And let's face it, he used to be 2 years old one day. And if you had walked by him on the street, you wouldn't have known that he's going to grow up to kill millions of people and devastate the world. But these are facts, and they happen. And in Iran, the signs of danger happened, and not overnight. One little sign here, one little sign there. Dancing became illegal, singing became illegal, wearing bright colors for women became illegal, then the miniskirt became illegal, and then we had to wear the hijab. And Sharia law began to govern the country. And we had grown up being free according to Western standard, and now suddenly we had to abide by all these new rules, and we didn't want to. We honestly didn't want to. I really liked my miniskirt, and I really liked my bikini, and we did protest on the streets of Tehran. But because it didn't happen overnight, grown-ups were busy paying their mortgages, making their car payments. But we students, because we couldn't watch the Donny and Marie Osmond show anymore, we were on the streets of Tehran, and we were protesting as early as 1980. Now, you didn't see it happen because back then there was no YouTube and there was no internet. But my generation, protests in Iran didn't begin in 2009 with a rigged presidential election. It happened in 1980. And I was on the streets of Tehran protesting against the Islamic Republic. And then what happened? Well, yes, the new dress code, and my dad was a ballroom dancing instructor. He had to shut down his dance studio because dancing was declared satanic. A woman's voice, a woman was not allowed to sing even a note because that is satanic. If you show your hair in public, that is also satanic. So then the waves of arrest began, and people were being arrested left and right. Now, I'm sure you have heard the name Evin prison. Now, we Canadians, we heard a little bit more about it because of Zahra Kazemi, the photojournalist, the Canadian-Iranian photojournalist that was tortured to death in Evin prison. And the news of her death